Right. So, welcome to my presentation on NeurOptimal and exploring whether this is a good fit for your practice. I'm going to just switch there to my slides. Okay, so I'm going to just review a little bit of my own personal journey, how I found NeurOptimal neurofeedback and brought it into my practice, and what that process was like for me. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the technology, how it works, what kind of conditions it helps, and then talk a bit about how the NeurOptimal system, which is dynamical neurofeedback, how that's different from protocol-based systems. And then I'm going to talk more specifically about how you might think about integrating it into your own practice or starting a NeurOptimal practice as a standalone. And I'll end with some details about pricing, financing, and becoming a certified trainer. And then, of course, any questions you have, please feel free to enter them into the chat window, or we'll have a bit of time at the end to discuss. So that's the journey we're going to be on. So I was introduced to the concept of neurofeedback back in 2010. So my training is in psychotherapy. I work as a psychotherapist, but I've also been a long time meditator and teach meditation. And it happened to be that I was teaching a weekend meditation program, and one of my students, who was in finance, had been approached to fund a peak performance neurofeedback center in Manhattan. And he was very curious to hear what I thought of neurofeedback. And when he brought it up over lunch, I had never heard the term. And so he gave me a brief description. And I was very curious because as he described it, which is technology that allows the brain, and specifically the automatic functioning brain patterns, to be identified and changed through technology and giving feedback to that part of the brain, which would impact things like anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress. I became very curious because that's one of the biggest obstacles or challenges we have in the world of psychotherapy and mental health is how do we get the brain to stop doing those brainwave patterns that produce symptoms that are very challenging for our clients. So he suggested I read the book Symphony in the Brain, which is a New York Times science writer's review of the history of neurofeedback. He updated it in 2007, so it's actually out of date. It actually doesn't even include the NeurOptimal technology because it came after that. But it is a very good introduction to the history of protocol-based neurofeedback. So I do recommend that for anybody interested. And so the path that I chose to take was to try to find psychotherapists who had integrated neurofeedback into their practices and find out how that'd been for them. And I talked to enough therapists who had started out with protocol-based neurofeedback, and I'll talk more about what that technology is and how it's different from the NeurOptimal system. But I spoke to enough who had switched from protocol-based to NeurOptimal that I decided that I would start with this technology. And the big shift that has happened that made it very attractive to me was that it went from the outside trainer having to set protocols to entrain and migrate the brain waves out of the maladaptive patterns to becoming a fully automated system, which was purely a feedback system without any sort of pushing a state change. That I was very attracted to that because, my main focus was psychotherapy and doing that work And so the idea that I could bring in this technology, but I didn't have to worry about the fact that I was going to be tweaking people's brains, made it much more appealing to me. So I went off and tried NeurOptimal neurofeedback on myself. And I also sent a couple of my clients who were very eager to see improvement in their post-traumatic stress disorder. And, all of us had some good results. And so I decided that I would integrate this technology into my psychotherapy practice, really from the point of view of wanting to bring in effective tools that I could bring alongside my psychotherapy to help my clients with their symptoms. So that was in 2010. And back then, the whole idea of brain training was not a common sort of language in our culture. And it was definitely much more of a challenge talking to people about this because, they had images of like Frankenstein. Whereas today, you talk about brain training and people get the basic concept of like, oh yeah, of course, the brain is a part of the body that can use being exercised so that it works its best. Like, I get that. So today it's much easier to talk about neurofeedback or brain training than it was back then. But nevertheless, brought it into my practice, used it with all of my clients, basically everybody who was on board, integrated into their psychotherapy, as well as I had a technician doing sessions for me. And then because this technology is fully automated, we started a rental program where people could also rent the equipment and take it home, which made it very attractive for people who wanted to train family members. So fast forward to today, there are 3 psychotherapists in my practice. We're all using NeurOptimal, as well as I have sessions available as standalone with a technician both in New York and Los Angeles. Sarah St. John, who offers sessions in LA, she's here on our call. And we have a national rental program. And then about 3 years ago, I became a sales representative for NeurOptimal. And that's how, we're all on this call today, is because I help professionals, people in mental health as well as wellness, explore NeurOptimal and see if it's a good fit for their practice. So just wanted to give a few images of what the technology looks like. It's fairly straightforward. And there are EEG sensors. You'll see the small box there beside the woman in both pictures. That's an amplifier that takes the voltage that's being collected. Nothing goes back through the wires. So we collect the voltage. It goes into the amplifier. And the amplifier basically amplifies the information, turns it into numbers from voltage. And then that's fed into a dedicated Surface tablet that has the software. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how this technology works. So, at this point, we all understand that the brain communicates through chemicals and through electricity. So NeurOptimal and neurofeedback is looking specifically at the electrical communication of the brain. And so part of our evolution in the field of mental health is understanding the connection between those electrical communications and mental health and symptoms and symptom relief. So one of the things that we see is that the brain gets habituated to brainwave patterns, and those patterns manifest in symptoms that we call anxiety and depression and post-traumatic stress. And so one of our challenges in this field is how do we get the brain to stop doing those maladaptive patterns and recognize that they're not appropriate for the here and now. So now to talk a little bit specifically about the NeurOptimal system. So as you saw in the picture, there were EEG sensors that were attached with conductive paste to the sides of the head, site C3 and C4. It's a general area. One of the things, just little interesting facts to know, is that if you put an EEG sensor anywhere on the head, it's going to pick up 95% of the cortical voltage. So there doesn't need to be exact precision in the location, but roughly on the C3, C4. And then there are two that are clipped to the ears as references. And then there's a grounder on the right side. And then, as I said, that electrical information is collected through the amplifier. It's then sent into the software. And the software takes 256 data points per second. And so I specifically want to say that because one of the things we don't appreciate is how fast our brains are communicating and changing states. So in milliseconds, we are constantly making decisions with our electrical patterns. And so what happens and what the system is looking for in that information that it's collecting is it's looking for state change. So it's looking for the brain pivoting and making a different decision. And so with the NeurOptimal system, as I mentioned before, it's purely a feedback system. And the information that's being collected, it's looking for a particular kind of electrical dance called turbulence. And turbulence is what the brain does before the millisecond or millimillisecond before it performs a new action. It does a electrical dance, and that is what the system is looking for so that it can cue the brain to pay attention to what it's doing. So the key quality that we all know about habits is that they're unconscious automatic. And that's what we're trying to interrupt, is that unconscious automatic. And so when turbulence is identified, we use auditory sense perception, because that is the main way that we naturally look for change in our environment. So because we can listen for change even when we're asleep, it's advantageous to visual feedback. So the feedback we use is auditory. So in the millisecond that the system picks up on state change or turbulence, it interrupts the music that is playing for the person, either through headphones or it could be just through the speakers of the system. And what happens for the automatic functioning brain when that micro interruption occurs is that it's cued to pay attention. Something has changed. So an analogy for that might be having lunch with a friend, and you don't realize that you drifted off into a daydream thinking about some work problem. And then your friend says, Sarah. And in that moment, you recognize two events. You recognize where you went habitually. So you recognize, wow, I was totally lost in that daydream about work. And then you're also aware of what's happening in the present moment. Oh, I'm sitting across from my friend. I totally did not hear anything she just said to me. And so now the other thing that's happened is you now have choice, right? You can either go back into that daydream, or you can reorient and focus on having lunch and listening to your friend. And so that's what happens for the automatic brain when there is the micro interruption in the music. It pays attention to two events simultaneously. Those are what it's about to do habitually, and then what is the current environmental needs, both internally and also externally. And why that is important is because the brain wants to be efficient with its use of energy. So when it comes into the present and sees that what it's about to do habitually is not in alignment with the here and now, by design, it is motivated to, and it will attempt to change states. And so this is very significant in the moment, because then it's going to shift into a more efficient, more in alignment with the here and now. But the other really significant thing that is happening over a series of sessions is the brain is actually learning this as a new strategy to be more efficient and effective in its functioning. So by design, the brain is going to want to do this even when it's not hooked up to the neurofeedback system. So in a session, you get the shifting that happens from seeing what it's doing and then shifting if what it's doing is not in alignment with the here and now. And then we also get the learning that's taking place. The brain is learning, gosh, if I come into the present moment, I can make much better decisions that are more effective and more efficient. And so that's what's happening over, the series of sessions. So one of the big questions we get is, how do we know when changes are happening? And the way this system has been designed, so Dr. Sue and Val Brown, who designed this system, they have a background in clinical psychology. Dr. Val Brown also has a background in neuropsychology. He studied at Georgetown University with a very famous neurologist. Pribram is his name. The holotropic brain was his model of the brain and how the brain functions and optimizes itself. If you're interested, you can look up his work. But because they were clinical psychologists, one of the things they really appreciated was that, to support people staying with the training, building up their self-awareness and seeing the changes is key to motivating them to keep going, but also the ultimate result that we want, which is we want people to be able to see the changes in their lives. So for that reason, they designed checklists, self-reporting checklists, as the main way to see the changes over a series of sessions. And so, while the professional system does have some data that you can look at as evidence of change, I actually don't use that data, and they discourage clinicians from using it because the primary goal of really getting people to see the changes in themselves and track them over time using checklists is actually much more effective. So I want to switch now to talk a little bit about the benefits. And one of the things that, for those of you who are in the mental health field, the stress response is a key part of a lot of mental health issues and physical health issues for that matter. So any condition that's connected with a stress response tends to respond very well from the neurofeedback, the NeurOptimal system. And I want to talk a little bit about why that is. So for those of you who maybe aren't as familiar, anxiety disorders, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, insomnia, they all have panic disorders, they all have the stress response and habituation of the stress response as a key component, or maybe we could say the key brain component to these conditions. So you'll see we have 3 zones here in this graph, and I use my fingers as my fancy way of describing this. So what happens with the stress response is that, we're supposed to, as animals, we're supposed to stay in a zone of regulation, which is perceiving the environment as safe. And this is when we have our prefrontal cortex being the part of our brain that's in charge and most engaged. That's our critical thinking, our impulse control, logic, empathy, all very key and central to the prefrontal cortex, our higher brain functioning. And then what we're supposed to do is, if there is danger, and the brain defines danger very specifically as something that could cause bodily harm in less than a minute, as animals, so we're now engaging our more primitive core brain, limbic brain self, we're supposed to have, and this is where our listening comes in, our listening for change. Part of what that limbic brain is doing is listening for danger. What could harm this body in less than a minute? And if the brain perceives there is approaching danger, it is supposed to go up into that hyper arousal flight response, or go down into the hypo arousal collapse freeze response. In immediate response to the danger is supposed to pass, and then we're supposed to come out of those zones 1 and 3 and back into that regulated zone of perceiving safety, becoming open, calm again, right afterwards. And so this is a dynamic process that we're supposed to be engaged in, but ultimately we're really supposed to live in here. And so when we have mental health symptoms, we have stress in our lives, we have anxiety or depression, what is happening on that neurological brainwave level is that we're stuck. We're stuck in that fight-flight energy. We're stuck in that freeze response energy. And remember, we're supposed to be in those zones when there is imminent danger. So now let's go back to what the NeurOptimal system is doing, right? We've got our sensors put on, we're sitting, we're listening to the music, and all of that electrical information is being collected millisecond by millisecond, looking for that state change that's happening. And whenever the brain is going into zones 1 or 3, right, which is response to danger, right, and we're being cued to pay attention, the brain is going to see, wow, I'm going up into that fight-flight energy, but I'm sitting in a room where there's no immediate danger. Why am I doing that, right? Again, I'm designed to use my energy efficiently and effectively, and hyper-arousal, that takes a lot of energy. So when it's cued to pay attention, come into the present moment, see what you're doing habitually, right? Going up into here, assess your current needs, safety. So the brain is going to want to come down into that middle zone. And again, because the brain is going to learn to do this over the series of sessions, you don't have to be in a state of panic in order for the brain to understand that it's doing the wrong thing in the present moment. It will recognize that over and over again as it does this, out in the world. So people will ask me, well, don't I, for example, a condition that people often do neurofeedback for is ADHD. And parents will ask me, well, doesn't my child, kind of need to have the schoolwork in front of them in order for the brain training to really work? And again, the answer is no, because we're teaching the brain to do this functioning, right? Come into the present, see what the present moment needs are, then make a decision, right? It's like, it will learn, oh gosh, I've got my focusing work in front of me. I need my focusing brainwaves. So it's going to shift because it's learning to do that. And so one of the things that I want to sort of switch and talk about is this whole progression from protocol-based neurofeedback systems to dynamical neurofeedback. And a lot of people are more familiar with dynamical neurofeedback because, the first 20 years of neurofeedback was primarily protocols. So let me just talk a little bit about what that is. So back in the day, when computer technology wasn't operating as fast, in order to be able to measure brain waves and then give the brain feedback, you needed an intervener. And so what protocol-based systems needed was they needed information about what was maladaptive, and then they would set protocols to get the brain to shift into those different brain waves. So you would need either a brain map, such as a QEEG, or you would need a diagnosis. And so you would get that and you would see that, gosh, their alpha is too high or their beta is too low. And then you would set protocols to entrain and migrate the brain to come out of over arousal of certain brainwave patterns or under performance of certain brainwaves, and try to get them to be more in alignment with what we would call typical brain patterning. And protocol-based neurofeedback is very effective. It does require a very skilled practitioner because you're having to set and shift protocols based on what people report back or what the new brain maps show. And Dr. Val Brown, who is the sort of mastermind behind the technology, he started out in protocol-based neurofeedback, and he could see that when computer power got to a certain level, that there would be a way to make the technology reflect more how the brain organically optimizes its functioning. But the time was needed for the speed of computers to get to that 256 data points per second level of data collection so that it could give that real-time feedback. So now you could think of that brain mapping, which was taken before and then used as a static thing to then set protocols. Now that's seamlessly integrated into the software. So the brain mapping, you could say, is integrated millisecond by millisecond into the training. So it's actual real-time feedback. So as the brain is shifting, the feedback is shifting constantly. So every neurofeedback session is different because the brain is in a different, doing different functioning, but the basic principle is always taking place, which is we are going to show this brain every single decision it's making and then alert it to pay attention and compare that to data in the present moment in terms of those environmental needs. And then that brain will optimize its functioning in the present moment, as well as recognize that this is a very good strategy to use long term, rather than the efficiency strategy of habits, which is, gosh, I'm just going to take one or two cues from the environment and just assume that now is like then. So going back to that stress response, and let's say, post-traumatic stress, which is the trauma response becomes habituated, right? So for the veteran, the car backfires, right? And the brain goes, I know that sound, right? That is the sound of gunfire. That means I need to go up into my hyper arousal and go into a fight response, right? And that is the challenge of post-traumatic stress, is getting that brain to register that no, now is not like then. Don't just do what's habitual. Really pay attention to the current environmental needs. And so the NeurOptimal software is giving that brain the opportunity, you could say it's like a mirroring principle, so that it can see how it's acting as if now is like then. And then by design, that brain is going to shift to be more in alignment with the here and now, which means it's going to use its energy more efficiently, and it's going to be more effective, right? Rather than punching the world, right? It could just use words. So lots of things can shift as the brain has learned to function differently. And so going back to, what are the benefits of NeurOptimal? So anything that we see in connection with this stress response, starts to shift. So what I like to say is that we calm down and we cheer up. And so in this zone, right, that we can focus whenever there's safety, right, then the brain feels fine focusing. So that ability to focus and follow through and create plans, those, executive functioning skills improve. Obviously, mood improves, communication improves. So rather than having that reactive communication style, we can now be responsive because we're not perceiving what's coming at us as dangerous. We're understanding that it's information for us. So I see communication between couples and in family systems improving as people get out of that reactive yelling, being defensive, or just shutting down. For people who are more caught in that hypoarousal, collapsed, depressive style, what tends to happen organically is they start, as they come up more into this zone of being open, is they just naturally start to talk more. And I see this more in men than I do in women, but certainly both. Often when I'll check in around session 8 and I'll say, how are you doing? What are you noticing? These gentlemen who have been caught in this freeze response shutdown, they say, well, I'm not really sure, but, my partner, my wife, just loves that I'm coming for neurofeedback and says that I'm like open and I'm asking them questions and I'm talking more, and I guess that's happening, but they're so happy I'm doing this. So often, this example demonstrates that often it can be people close to that individual who see the changes, and then that, conversation then sparks that self-awareness in the individual to go, oh yeah, I guess that is happening, and I am doing things differently. Obviously, for people who have, stress-related sleep issues, that improves for people because, again, when the brain is training and learning to come into the present moment, assess current needs before I make a decision, right? If it's doing that, it's going, wow, it's nighttime. I'm in a safe environment. Oh, I really need to go back into that, rest and relax mode, and out of that go mode. And so then they're much more easily able to fall asleep, particularly if they have, relatively good sleep hygiene practices. Another area that we see a lot of dramatic improvement is in people who have head injuries, because those brains really want the feedback to see what they need to be working on, to keep improving their functioning over time. So whether it's a concussion related, stroke related, we have somebody training right now who had a brain tumor removed. And, she's doing neurofeedback daily, and really says that it helps her stay calm and, her feeling like her language skills are coming back more quickly. And so, which leads me to the question of, well, how many sessions should somebody do of NeurOptimal? And again, because it is designed to optimize brain functioning, there is no set number, because the design is about improvement of global functioning. It is not so much like we're going to kind of do and train and migrate using the protocol-based systems. We're going to do 20 sessions, upping your alpha, and 10 sessions trying to lower your beta. So the NeurOptimal system can be looked at in two ways. You can look at it as symptom relief, and that when people see their symptoms really shifting and their stability, they may decide to stop training and typically people who rent from us, they rent for 2 to 3 months, training, multiple times a week, 3, 4 times a week. For people who come into the office, we encourage them to come twice a week at first, and then to go to once a week. But typically for symptom relief where there is no underlying organic cause that's contributing. So for example, if people have hormonal issues or serious gut issues, so their guts are not producing the precursors to what the brain needs to change, that's going to slow down and impact the effects of the neurofeedback. Or people who have underlying, for example, Lyme disease, that's also going to impact. So organic issues can impact the speed of change and how much can change. But, children who are training with anxiety or ADHD, typically 3 months of training is sufficient. And then there's the second category of people who train, which is, recognizing stress is in everybody's lives. And we kind of push the limits of, being able to stay in that regulated zone. People can also think about this as an ongoing support to optimize their brain functioning longer term. So, we have families who elect, once they see, oh, it's really helping, they decide to buy a system because they recognize, wow, this is helping with the ADHD right now, but I really like, for when things get really stressful, later on in school, I want them to continue to have this support. And, I've got a stressful job, and, they see this as part of like their ongoing self-care. So there's no right way to engage with this brain training. It's really about giving people the options and giving them the understanding of how it can help so that they can make an informed decision. So now I want to move on a little bit to talk about, how you might integrate this into your existing practice, or if you're thinking of starting a NeurOptimal brain training practice. So because this technology is fully automated and you're not having to set protocols, it is very simple and easy to operate. And it is, so NeurOptimal specifically went to the FDA and asked the FDA if they would recognize the NeurOptimal system as a general wellness device, as opposed to it being a medical device. And they did that for a couple of reasons. One reason is that it is a safe system to use because it is purely feedback. We're just alerting the brain to pay attention to what it normally does not pay attention to, and contrast that decision with what the current needs are. That brain makes its own determination what to do with that information. So there's no forcing the brain to do something with that information. So because it is purely feedback, it is safe to use for any age group. That was one reason why they wanted it to be acknowledged as a general wellness device. But the second reason was they wanted consumers to be able to have access to it without needing a licensed healthcare provider to be the prescriber of it. And so for those reasons, they asked the FDA to make this designation. And a year and a half ago, the FDA came back to them and said, yes, we will recognize your system as a general wellness device. So anybody can use it. And it also means that anybody can become a certified NeurOptimal trainer. You don't need to be a mental health care or a healthcare provider in order to do this. And it also means that you can have technicians administer the sessions for you. So that provides a lot of flexibility in terms of how you might set it up in your practice. I wanted to give my clients the opportunity to have different price points in which they can engage in this training. And so they could see me at my full fee, they could see a technician in my office, and they could also rent a system, which basically made it about half the price per session, or even less than that, as, to take it home. And that also made it much more convenient, and especially if you're training children, much easier to train them at home than get them into an office. And certainly during a pandemic, as we're in now, you know, the ability for people to continue with their training at home has been a real support. And I've actually had a lot of inquiries in the last 6 months from people who were doing protocol-based neurofeedback in office. So protocol-based neurofeedback, because you need that expert trainer setting the protocols, it's not appropriate for home use. So we got a lot of people whose neurofeedback was interrupted because they couldn't go into the office anymore. And so they switched over to the dynamical neurofeedback, our system, and, you know, had great results. So, you know, that transition can be very seamless for people. And so it just adds to the value of this system, you know, that you can give it to them at different price points and the convenience factor. And so, let's see. One of the nice things, I guess I'll just say, and then we can look at the actual technology, is that, you know, when you're in the health profession, you know, we make our income, particularly if we're have sole practices or, you know, running our own businesses. You know, we get paid if we're in face to face with an individual, and so it's really nice also, as the clinician, to be able to have a way to create some passive income through the rental systems. So it really becomes a win-win for the provider, you know, and the consumer, to be able to offer some rentals. So just again to review, you know, you can offer in-office sessions where you do the hookups yourself. Once you hook somebody up, you don't have to stay in the room. You can go and be in a side room, you know, attending to other things and check in. You can have a clinician running sessions. You can have yourself or a clinician running multiple sessions simultaneously, because once you hook somebody up, which takes about, you know, 5-10 minutes to check in, hook them up, you know, then you're free and you can go hook up a second person in another room. So it's very advantageous, this style of a system, because it just offers you different ways you can configure it. And then, of course, you can do rentals, and you can also participate in benefiting from the sale of systems if any of your clients or customers decide that they want to own a system. So now to talk a little bit about, you know, the cost of NeurOptimal and bringing it into your practice. So the way that the marketing or the packaging is done of this system is it comes as a bundle. So the price includes everything that you need to set it up in your practice. And you'll see in this photo here, there is the Surface tablet, which is the computing system there on the right, that has the software. And then there is a monitor, which is basically a display screen, which you can or not use in your practice. And because the primary feedback is auditory, they don't have to look at a screen. There is you'll see behind the graphing with the brain waves there's a pixelated screen which can offer some secondary feedback visually. I actually don't offer my clients to look at a screen during sessions when they come into the office, because I've found that it's actually a bit more beneficial if they close their eyes or just focus on their breath or look out the window, cultivating things that bring us more into alignment, noticing our bodies. I found that to be more beneficial. But you can also um, offer movies, and the audio of the movie becomes the source of the feedback. So they're listening to the movie, and whenever there are those micro interruptions, the audio of the movie stops. And so if you're going to work with children, watching a movie for them is more engaging, or a cartoon. There are some streaming services you can integrate. Those will be offered over time more with NeurOptimal, but right now I think there's just a couple of streaming services you can use to show children some content. But again, because it's auditory, children could also, be looking at a book, or the person could fall asleep. I've noticed that definitely with people who are sleep deprived. As soon as they get into the chair and start doing the training, and their brain starts getting the feedback to pay attention, and they would start registering that they're in a safe environment, those chronically sleep deprived brains will immediately go to sleep. And because, again, we're always listening for changes in our environment, they're still doing the training, everything is good. But their brain has just set a primary need, which is, wow, I really need to get sleep. And so it turns the body off during the session. And so going back to the actual equipment, so it's sold as a bundle. So you get your monitor, your amplifier, 2 sets of sensors, some paste. And you can choose between an i5 or an i7. The i7 is a faster processor. I would say if you're going to have a lot of video content stored on your system, or music, that probably the i7 would be better. I actually have i5s for all my systems, and I find they work perfectly well. And so the bundle for the i5, as you can see, is just under 10,000, and the i7 is just over. And they do offer in-house financing, and they have a program through their pass membership, which I'll talk about in a minute, where if you're a pass member, you can finance a professional system with $3,700 down, or $3,750 down, with no interest for 3 years, and your monthly payments are $175 a month. So you can see that your monthly cash flow here, it's very, very quickly you'll recuperate what you're paying for servicing, the paying off the system. You'll pay for in client fees very quickly. So it is a low price point entry in terms of how quickly you'll see a return on your investment. And purchasing through using the financing is very straightforward. It's a 1-page application. It's a soft credit check. And then again, if you do decide to use the pass financing, it's no interest for 3 years. They also have a non-pass, like just general financing program with the same down payment. And I think the monthly payments are about $350 or $375 if you're paying off in a year, with 10% interest over the period. So a lot of options. Certainly some people just put it on a credit card and pay for it outright. But one of the things that you receive when you purchase a system is that you receive what's called a pass preview, which is a 3-month free service that allows you access to a bunch of supports. So you'll have access to templates that you could use to create your consent form, the checklists. There's also an online forum and it's basically a database archive of all sorts of topics, from starting a business to different clinical topics, different conditions, working with children. And you can search any terms and you can see the history of conversations over the last 10 years on whatever subject interests you. And there's also a whole database of webinars. So lots of information, lots of education that's there should you be interested. It gives you 3 months of free technical support and a loaner service should something happen to your system. Although in my experience, I think I've taken advantage of that once. And you also have the opportunity to, if you decide that you want to, you can then get a paid pass membership, which is $995 for the year. And that's all the supports I just described ongoing, as well as 10% off of accessories that you need, such as new sensors, courses that you want to take. And if any of your clients decide that they want to purchase a system, if they're new to NeurOptimal and buying for the first time, and you're a past member, you receive $1,000 commission on the sale of the system. So if you have one person buy a system in a year, that basically pays for your past membership, and then you've got all your free tech support. There are also 2 free supports that come with your membership that are very helpful. There's a Facebook community group, as well as a tech support group. And both of those things are free supports, and they have search bars, and you can post questions. They're moderated by NeurOptimal trainers, and the tech support team page is moderated by the tech support. So, there's lots of availability, and there's lots of community too. To whatever extent you want to engage in community, they're, really NeurOptimal's kind of the way they function is more from the point of view of wanting people to be able to connect with each other and discuss, how their training is going, what kind of populations they're working with. One of the things I didn't mention that I should mention in all of this, which is implied, but I should explicitly state it, is that, this is a training device and it's not considered a treatment device. And, that's one of the main designation differences with the FDA in terms of a general wellness device versus a medical device. So a medical device is designated to treat X condition. And a general wellness device is considered to be a support for overall general health and wellness. So why that's important is that, and this is getting a little bit more on the technical side, is that when you're talking about NeurOptimal in a public way, it needs to be from the point of view of supporting general wellness, not as treating specific conditions. And then, of course, in your practice, whatever your training is in, talking about using NeurOptimal as part of how you treat anxiety or whatever is appropriate, because, that is your, that's what you do under your licensing that you have. But in your general communication to the general public, NeurOptimal is a general wellness device. It is not a treatment device. And I have actually found that, talking about NeurOptimal in terms of how it fits overall in how we optimize our functioning, or how we even, improve our anxiety, it's actually more helpful to talk about it as one of the spokes of a wheel of supports we use, because I think where where we're moving out of is kind of the one pill wonder model. What is the one thing that is going to get rid of X? I would say that a big part of my job is to educate people about, the brain and brain health and wellness, and what are all the things that the brain needs in order to function at its best. And so, NeuroOptimal obviously being the one we're talking about today. But one of the things sometimes that, I'll end up talking to people about is, well, what are the other supports that you have in place? And, going back to, well, what are the benefits of NeuroOptimal? One of the things that I see consistently happen is that even when people have poor nutrition, don't get exercise, are in relationships that are toxic or not beneficial, and so the only support they're starting with maybe is the NeurOptimal neurofeedback, that what then tends to happen, as that brain comes out of that dysregulated and stays more in that regulated place, is that very organically they start to address the other areas of functioning or their lifestyle that are suboptimal. So people say things like, Natalie, I finally decided to go back to the gym. Or, I've known for a long time that kind of my diet is horrible, and, I got digestive issues, and I finally decided, to take the steps to go see a nutritionist or go to a functional medicine doctor. And so it sort of becomes like that one support of the NeurOptimal neurofeedback makes it so that then people can start to address the other supports, and it becomes this sort of virtuous circle of supports that keeps us, functioning at our best, reducing symptoms. So I think I'm actually gone a little long. I will just say briefly, becoming a certified NeurOptimal trainer is a 2-day course that you can either do as a live online program, or you can do it as a pre-recorded session. And then there's an exam to take at the end. Because the system is fully automated, running sessions is not a big focus, because you can see that putting some sensors on the side of the head and clip to the ears and then pressing a start button is not very difficult. So really the focus of the course is really talking about kind of the bigger picture of, what are maladaptive brainwaves about? How are they measured? What is the role that NeurOptimal plays? What might get in the way of the NeurOptimal neurofeedback, creating the changes that we would expect, and just kind of the bigger picture questions about, how is it that the brain optimizes itself. So that's a 2-day seminar. And then you're a certified trainer. One of the benefits of the past membership, if you decide to purchase it, is that you get listed on the NeurOptimal website under Find a Trainer. So if someone's looking for a trainer in your town, you're listed there, your website, your contact information. And so I think that's it. Sarah, I don't know if you have collected any questions, or if anybody who's participating has any questions, but certainly do ask them now if you do. And let me, guess if you do, you can put them in the chat window. Sarah, anything that you think we should, oh, here we've got one.
No, I was just posting that I haven't gotten any questions yet, but
okay, great.
Were there any questions that you wanted to address that we received with the email?
I think I've covered most of them. there was a question about the difference with heart math, which is a technology that looks at the heart rate, and we could maybe consider it more of a biofeedback device that's used to help the system to re-regulate itself. NeurOptimal is about using the cortical, the brainwave activity. So I would say that that's the main difference between those two technologies. Yes, the session is recorded, so we'll be sending that out to everybody either later today or tomorrow. But certainly as follow-up, we have lots of information on our website, neurofeedbacktraining.com. There's a blog and a search bar, so you can search any topic that interests you. We also have some pages that have quite a bit of detailed content. And also the parent company, NeurOptimal, you can go to their website. If you click on the international, that when it says, what country do you live in, you can see the most information if you enter through that portal. And also, of course, reach out to me. My email, Natalie@neurofeedbacktraining.com. I'd be more than happy to schedule a call or have an email exchange. So I think we're done for today. Thank you, everybody who showed up, and those of you who listened afterwards. I hope you all have a good weekend. And again, don't hesitate to reach out with further questions. So we'll end it here.